Hello, let's talk goals and objectives. The things that we're going to cover are goals versus objectives. We'll cover goals in depth and objectives in depth, and then the elements of SMART objectives. Before we get started, let's take a quick look at the SMART format. The SMART format is the way that we write objectives so that we can understand how they clearly need to be accomplished. SMART objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. If you're not currently familiar with SMART objectives, don't worry, you will be by the end. So let's talk goals versus objectives. So first, think of a goal like a cake. It's the whole thing. The goal is the long-term direction of a program, the long-term direction of your life even. It tends to be a more general statement. An objective is like a piece of the cake. It breaks down the goals into small, realistic, and measurable actions. They tend to be clear and concise with achievable expectations and results. Okay. Let's take that a little bit slower. So the goal is our cake. We want to eat the entire cake. In order to do that, we can't just shove the entire cake in our mouth unless you have some skills I'm not aware of. You have to take individual bites. To start with the bites, you're probably going to take a small slice of cake, eat that, and go from there. Objectives and goals work the same way. So let's think about a goal that is applicable to your life. For example, if your goal is to graduate from BYU, Idaho with a bachelor's degree in public health or a related field, you can't wake up one day, decide you're going to do that, and magically the next day have your degree. That's not how it works. There are small steps that you have to take along the way in order to reach that goal. So the first thing you might do is enroll in the university. Then you may take the first level classes. Then you may meet with a counselor and determine what additional classes you need to complete the prerequisites before you start taking your major classes. Or if you're going through the certificate program, you might determine what you need to take to complete the first certificate. So goals are those long-term direction, general statements. Objectives are how you get there, how you make that into a reality. A little bit more about goals. They help to guide our programs, but we can't really quantify them. So if we go back to that college example, my goal is to graduate from college, but that achievement is difficult to quantify. In this case, it's less difficult because either I graduate or I don't. But if we're saying I want to graduate from BYU, Idaho and be a prepared public health professional, how do we measure that prepared public health professional? I like the alliteration there. We don't really have a way of measuring that. We don't have a way of quantifying it. So we need to find objectives so we can quantify it. An example might also be reducing hunger in the United States. How are we going to know when we've reduced hunger? Or lowering high blood pressure in the United Kingdom. How are you going to measure that blood pressure was lower in the population, given that you don't have baseline data? So you don't know what the state of blood pressure in the country was prior to the start of your program. Or improving water quality in Mississippi. How do we know when we've actually reached that goal? How do we know how far we have come? There has to be some sort of baseline measurement. There also has to be small milestones along the way that help us know whether or not we have met our goal. Objectives are how we do that. Objectives answer the who is going to do it, what are they going to do, when are they going to do it, and to what extent. So let's look at that a little bit closer. The objectives break goals down into specific and measurable actions so the goal can be accomplished. If we go back to our college example, my goal is to graduate BYU, Idaho with a degree in public health to be a prepared public health professional. Okay, how am I going to measure that? How am I going to judge it? Am I going to say, in order to meet that goal, I'm going to have to take the following classes and get at least this score. I'm going to have to complete an internship. What do I have to do? Objectives can also define those partners who help you in accomplishing your goal. So if we go to the hunger example, if we're trying to reduce hunger in the United States, we can't do that alone. And in public health, we cannot really accomplish that because public health doesn't have the ability to reduce hunger. So who are we going to need to work with? Probably the USDA, probably WIC, probably schools, businesses, things like that. You define your partners and then you assign them tasks. This gives everyone ownership and it uses the scarce resources you have better. You need to develop some realistic targets. While we do encourage you to aim big to change the world, you also need to get something done. And to say, I'm going to end world hunger is actually not realistic. Maybe you need to say you're going to reduce the percentage of children ages 5 to 18 who report hunger outside of school hours. You'll also use an active voice and action verbs. Objectives are something that you are going to do. So tell us what you're going to do. There's 2 general types. There's process and outcome objectives and 3 timelines, which are short, intermediate, and long term. Let's break that down a little bit further. So our objective timeline. First, the short-term objectives, those occur within 1 year of implementation. Intermediate, those follow up directly on those shorter term objectives, and then long-term outcomes or objectives, they ultimately determine the impact or outcome of the program at a certain point in time that is more than 1 year out. This is the same slide again, just don't want you to forget it. So let's talk a little bit about the types of objectives. We have those process objectives and the outcome objectives. The process objectives occur within a specific time period. They explain what is being done, how it is being done, and when it will be complete, and describe activities and participants. The outcome objectives are a little bit harder to quantify, and they express the intended program results. So often the outcome objectives are written long before they're actually needed. They focus on change of any kind. So this could be policy, it could be health status, it could be the environment, etc. They are looking at the change. Let's talk about the SMART objectives. The SMART objectives are widely used throughout the social sciences and even in the business world as well to make sure that when you are writing these problem statements or goals and objectives, you make sure that you have all of the necessary information. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, actionable or achievable, relevant, and time-bound. That first option, specific, is actually the what exactly are we going to do and to whom are we going to do it. So it identifies the population, the setting, any specific actions, and how the change will be implemented, because that will impact the specific SMART objectives. It uses terms like provide, increase, decrease. Okay, the measurable SMART objective quality. Measurable is asking you to determine whether or not your objective is quantifiable. And if it is, how are you going to measure it? If it's not, what do you need to do to change it? Measurable implies the ability to count results, collect data, data accuracy, data collection, and baseline measurement. SMART objectives attainable and achievable. Can the objective be completed in the timeline specified with the resources available? It requires an understanding of the historical trends, consultation with partners and stakeholders, and understanding your resource limits. Relevant, will this objective affect the achievement of the desired goal? Sometimes your objectives will, and sometimes they won't negatively impact. It requires an understanding of the relationship between the objective and the overall good. So sometimes an objective will be made that is good for one person, but not for others. And finally, time-bound. When will this objective be accomplished? It requires a reasonable time framework based on analysis of historical events, understanding of your resources, and awareness of how your specific objectives fit within the larger organization. So let's look at some examples really quick. These are taken directly from the Millennial Development Goals. I recommend that you use this template provided so that you can write SMART objectives correctly. So first, by whatever date, someone will measure X compared to the baseline variable for Y. Okay, that was confusing, but let's dive a little deeper. So our example goal is the UN Sustainable Development Goal 1, which is end poverty in all its forms everywhere. Okay, so if you were given that objective, you might start to panic, or that goal, because it's a little bit hard to figure out how you're going to do it. So here are some objectives that can be met. By 2030, eradicate extreme poverty for all people everywhere, currently measured as people living on less than $1.25 a day. So you could do this with random sampling. Another example, by 2030, reduce at least by half the proportion of men, women, and children of all ages living in poverty in all its dimensions according to national definitions. So you would need to have this include the count of the people living in the U.S. and divide it by 2. This math, I understand, is getting a little complicated, and that is okay. 1.3 is implement nationally appropriate social protection measures for all, including floors, and by 2030 achieve sustainable coverage of poor and vulnerable. So what are you going to do? You are going to implement national appropriate social protection systems. You're delivering it to 230 people, and it is specific to poor and vulnerable populations. So you can go through and look at these slides specifically so that you have a better idea of some of what is being asked of you. Please let me know if you have any questions. Good luck on writing SMART objectives.